So we have around 20 minutes, and I would like to set the stage with one opening question, and then we can continue the discussion with questions from the audience. So please approach the microphone or raise your hand so my colleague can give you a microphone. You can have the microphones there, yes. So building your presentations on your efforts treating diseases with unmet needs, I would like to ask you, what are the key challenges that you encounter as academic centers in establishing and conducting clinical trials for cell therapies? I see Professor Subklewe is laughing. So you can, yeah.
No, I can use one. Please start.
I think there's many different challenges, unfortunately, to overcome and to consider. As you indicated, these are unmet need and oftentimes not as prioritized as other cancers. And they have associated challenges with them that have already made immunotherapy approaches that are working in other cancers less effective. So I think we already kind of are behind in terms of momentum and prioritization and interest. So trying to reach out and gain support and foster collaboration is already a bit challenging for these tumor types, particularly some of them that have been remarkably refractory to immunotherapy treatments, like glioblastoma, like pancreatic cancer, like ovarian cancer. I think AML, another one that's been very challenging and difficult to overcome. So I think this is, in some ways, very difficult because of that, what we have to overcome. But at the same time, I think there's opportunity where if we can work together and collaborate together and pool expertise and resources from different centers that have capabilities, that may be one strategy to be able to move forward. And there are, I think, growing efforts now where that type of a model is being put forth, where investigators from different centers focusing on overcoming some of these challenges are being able to collaborate and work together. It takes a kind of a unique infrastructure and funding and support to be able to do that. But I think there's some models where this challenge can actually be taken as an opportunity.
So I have three aspects I want to say. I mean, you could talk for a long time. But first of all, I would say funding and timeline. So if you ask for funding, you already have to have a good preclinical package, excellent ideas and pre-data to be competitive and to receive the grant. And then it takes, about 2 years possibly until you have the money on your account to start the clinical trial. And if you compare that to sort of US sites or something which have a different structure, you just already lose while you're sort of from idea to first funding. And then, so I think we don't have enough funding for early clinical trials. It's not supported, and also BMBF and so on. It's not meant to really support you. You have to put a lot of your own funds to actually get it working. And the timeline is a huge issue, I would say, because once you start your trial, you're already sort of boring and not state of the art anymore in a lot of sense. I mean, there are exceptions, but it can happen to you. Then I think infrastructure is a huge issue, and I mean I think there are activities currently now to improve cell and gene therapy in Germany, but I would sort of wish I had like, you know, a voucher or something and can say, it doesn't have to be in Munich or wherever you're located, but at least for our country have like, here I can get the real expertise to get this. I mean, I think it's absurd what we do with Paul-Ehrlich Institute, where like you think of every word and of every slide and you prepare and they're not sort of your friends, but they are sort of looking at you and how you're conducting, you want to conduct it, and then you get a sort of, you know, whatever report and you don't know if it's reliable or something. We need more infrastructure, I think. And the third thing is, which I think is also an issue, is it's not attractive to do clinical trials, right? So you need investigators who want to pursue this. And if you already think of timeline and all the difficulties, I can only advise to my younger clinician scientists, don't put your science and your career on a clinical trial. So, you know, I think our age group here reflects who is going to do clinical trials, right? That are sort of wherever, it doesn't matter anymore. But it's really, there's no incentive in Germany to do clinical trials. And that's also, I think, a problem.
Can you elaborate, Marion, a bit more why there is no incentive?
So I'm really happy now that the DFG changed their curriculum vitae, right? But I mean, our normal, if you apply for whatever position, it's how many third-party funding you have acquired and what is your number of publication and impact, right? So also if you do habilitation in Germany or something, that is sort of, and you have to do some teaching, right? It's already, you get the license for teaching, but even teaching is not really important. So it's sort of the research activities. And if you think of a clinical trial, I mean, I've done like a dendritic cell on a transfected dendritic cell trial. So our ideas and everything were 2009, you know, we started the trial 2013, and I think we published the trial in 2020 or something, right? And that tells you already something. And, you know, you can do it maybe smarter and get some in-between paper somehow or something. But you know, for sort of ambitious people who want to pursue a career, they need to have certain milestone at a certain time point of their career. And so far there was no appreciation. Now with the DFG, the new CV and so on for these, you can put in sort of your expertise and also integrate something about clinical trials or something, but it's still not in our validation system. It doesn't really exist. So it's hard to encourage young investigators to sort of invest into a clinical trial, right?
Professor, how's the situation in South Korea?
Actually, we are somewhat behind in the cell and gene therapy field, but we are very advanced in technology like the semiconductive, some kind of phones, or some electronics, and some kinds of cars, and in many things except the cell and gene therapy. But and recently, there's many antibody, many company made antibody as a CMO, like the Samsung and many company. So some center might be the number one, and they make more than maybe 50% in the world. There are antibodies made there, but they are not interested in the cell and gene therapy yet because they want to know, is it really become money? So it's some kind of development and maintenance. But this time we'll talk about the breakthrough, right? And something we should develop about the unmet needs. And in Korea, our authority is not so reviewed many times about cell therapy. When I was studied in Baylor College of Medicine in 2009 and 2010. At the time, before the Kim Raya, there was 300 person worked there with the basic research, GMP production of vector and CAR-T and many cell and clinical trial regulation, QAQC. Everything was performed by one stop. So I'm very wonder about that system, and I think this system might be very important to make the breakthrough. But as you know, it's it needs many manpower and many equipment and many platforms. So there is no chance for me to this kind of work in Korea when I came back. But Prodigy make it possible because it reduced reduced many time and effort to make some cell therapy. So I think the platform is very important for the breakthrough. It is very easy way to catch up. I heard that maybe 3 or 6 years ago, there was some joint meeting with Chinese and Europe in EHA. And the chairman said that we are very behind comparing to China in the cell and gene therapy field. But now Europe very fastly catch up. I think it might be by the Miltenyi Biotec because you give the very good platforms, not manual but automated. So I think platform is very important to catch up and to make new things come true. And the other thing is authority. I think they need some because there's a new product always made, and it cannot follow the old guideline. So there might be the open and some discussion in the authority, and they should know that they do not know everything. So I think it's very important between authorities. There might be some connection that I think it's very important since for AML part, US and EMA has some meeting and they have concluded some guidelines. I see this kind of work might be happening in every other world. It may be fasten the development. So authority and the platform the idea might become true to the clinical trial.
I just think for the infrastructure, and probably you can comment better, but to my knowledge, for example, in the NIH, if you have a good idea and you want to move something into clinic, you meet with the pre-GMP team, and they sort of take the project and do the sort of development, and then it moves to the GMP team, you know. And I think Erlangen is a fantastic example how sort of innovation has something to do with possibility and availabilities of these kind of platforms, and it probably would never have happened if they wouldn't have their own sort of possibility to produce. And I think at least in Germany, we don't have a good infrastructures of these platforms, and not getting the support we need, because you cannot be an expert for everything, right? And this development into clinics needs to be facilitated by experts that are sort of focused on doing this, right? And I think the US is well advanced. I don't know if in real time it is always the case, but at least looking from the outside, it looks a little bit optimized compared to Germany.
No, it's unfortunately very frustrating and very slow and bureaucratic as well, I'm afraid. It might look differently from the outside, but it's not truly. But I think an important point about the clinical trials to think about is to think about different types of trials, and maybe not so much the typical paradigm of first in human, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, moving in that standardized way, but to think about maybe biologic endpoint-driven trials, proof of principle, proof of mechanism trials, which can be small numbers of patients, but I think those integrated very early on in the development of a therapy can have a very important impact on whether that should go forward to traditional efficacy-driven trials, for example. We talk a fair amount in some of the solid tumors now about these window of opportunity neoadjuvant study trials, which can give us a really fantastic opportunity to look at whether a drug is truly having an impact, as we hope it would, on the tumor, targeting the microenvironment, for example, and trying to change the phenotype, driving more T cells into the tumor. Seeing if it really is making that difference before we invest in these, much more, involved and many more patients and much more time in driven trials. And at least in our field, in neuro-oncology, that really is a critical area a critical application now for drug development. And I showed on that slide of the negative phase 3 studies that have been conducted with immunotherapy in thousands of patients. And if we had invested in some of these more biologically driven trials early on in the development of those therapies, maybe we would have realized we need to think about other approaches or other combinations or other strategies before we, embark in the hope that we'll be able to move forward into a registration pathway.
It's very interesting. Do we have any questions from the audience that we would like to discuss?
You mentioned that it might take quite some time to pursue a clinical trial, and also in AML as well as in GBM, you mentioned that probably combinations will be the only way to be successful at the end of the day. So potentially there are an endless number of combinations possible. So to test one combination after the other in a clinical trial takes a while. So is pursuing more platform trials, like we have seen a few, the way to go so that you can change compounds, combinations during the trial?
I can start. I think you're absolutely right. There's so many exciting potential combinations to try to explore, and to think about how to prioritize them is very daunting. But again, I think preclinical work can drive some of that, and then some of these biologically driven endpoint trials may be able to help prioritize combinations. And at least in my career, many times what we've anticipated and expected when we look at what's happening biologically is completely wrong and different, and we learn something new from that, and then can go forward more appropriately or more intelligently. So I think that's one way to strategize is to utilize those biologically driven trials for potential combination approaches. I think the platform trials that are fairly popular now can be very efficient and enroll many fewer patients in order to assess a potential efficacy endpoint, for example, in the context of adaptive randomization and enrollment relative to a concurrent, simultaneously enrolled control arm. And those adaptive Bayesian-driven enrollment strategies, I think, are one way to become much more efficient and be able to identify something importantly that's not working quickly and abandon it versus something that looks like a promising signal. We have a platform trial now that enrolls 70 patients per arm if it's effective and active. And in one of the arms, we were able to identify after 12 patients that this was not working, too toxic, and able to eliminate it. So I think these more efficient adaptive randomized designs may be able to help us move forward with some of these combinations and exciting approaches more quickly and more efficiently. We need that kind of a strategy, I think. We'll never be able to get through all of them with the kind of traditional designs.
I don't have much to add. I just want to repeat, I already said it, but I think what's really frustrating and at least would help also in our learning curve is if we could have a harmonization on reporting, because I mean there is already a lot of patients, for example, in the AML context treated, and it's very difficult to conclude anything because it's sort of scarce what is reported. So I think that is one of the issues also to help us at least to move forward. And I think in particular, we will need to study patients who are responding. We are always focusing on sort of what are kind of reasons why patients are refractory. I would also like to see more data. What was the patient who actually responded? What was the profile? What it looked like? How can we sort of copycat this? And then then I also think, particularly in AML, where we like genetics drive everything, we need to integrate sort of parameters that are relevant for immunotherapy also as a standard in this setting, which is, there are some, great Nature whatever papers, but it's not really integrated. We need some standards in there as well, because it's, I think, also very unlikely that one fits all, right? And that argues then for the platform characters.
Yeah, thank you for this wonderful morning session. I want to build off on that question of platform technologies, because the FDA uses the word platform a lot as well. When Peter Marks talks about platform, he usually talks about it in terms of CRISPR technologies, right? And that if I have an established workflow, I just need to validate my latest guide RNA and intervene with that. How close do you think we are with a system like Miltenyi has or other commercial systems to actually being a platform, and that, okay, I just need to trade in and out my transgene with an established set, and that the regulatory review doesn't have to be this incredibly extended process? The agency's asking for it. I don't know that we've provided them a case that this is a sustainable platform. So how would you see this as a regulatory basis for a platform?
Tricky question.
Maybe that was more of an editorial. I don't know.
Well, I think we all would very much agree, and I think the the opportunity of coming together and bringing people from different areas of focus and interest together in a conference like this, I think gives us a chance to share our experience in very different settings with this type of platform, with this type of technology, which is clearly, highly advanced and gaining more power and robustness as technology evolves. That I think you're absolutely right. We will need to get to standardized and harmonized approaches to be able to apply these technologies across our centers and even potentially across disease indications.
But I think we are contributing a little bit also to the challenge, right? Because we are not completely open and transparent on what we are doing. Everybody is doing it a little bit differently or something. So I think we also need to move forward to allow sort of acceptance of this platform technology.
Professor Kang, you talked in your presentation, you mentioned...
Actually, I think there's a new technology every day developed. And platform might be the living things that changed, I think. And this field of CAR-T is already established from long time ago, so it became a platform. So new CAR-T can be easily approached with this platform, but your new trial, or everybody's new trial might be needing more platform if it is proven efficacy and safety, and if it's some kind of field of some commercial, and it can become platform, I think. So for platform is necessary for the followers, I think. For the leaders, you make the platform, I think.
Yeah, I would agree, but this also, graft engineering, like for hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, much more established technology. We've been doing it for a lot longer. And trainees can build a career off of a modification intervention, right? So hopefully when we get a platform that's acceptable, more rapidly reviewed, then trainees can come in. It's not a sacrifice of their career. Because your point was exactly right, and I was just sharing with Mario. When Carl June first presented his CAR T cells at this large conference at the NIH, he said, and I'm internally indebted to about 4 or 5 fellows who sacrificed their career to do the regulatory filings. They're not on, they're middle author on a couple papers. They never got funding for it, but they, night and day for years, put together these packages. So it's absolutely right, but we have to address that.
Thank you. So we are running out of time, so we have just a quick question to close up.
I wanted to add to the discussion and wanted to ask what panel thinks about a regulatory parent-child concept, where essentially you run a phase 1 with a, let's say, cell therapy, CAR T cell, and then in a phase 2, rather than doing a combination therapy, and we talked about the complications, that there's so many iterations out there, to throw in essentially into your IMP, into your CAR T cell, let's say an armored T cell, a CRISPR-Cas construct, and basically not getting a new IND and start from the beginning again, but then in a phase 2, essentially saying, well, that's a combination essentially. It's still built on the same platform. You just throw in essentially another factor that knocks out a particular gene that is required to make the CAR T cells more effective. And do you think there's merit in discussing that with regulators? I mean, at least when we take regulators to the side, they are open to the concept to basically not always start from the beginning, but rather build on what you have established in a phase 1, and then kind of like a protocol amendment, essentially, well, you get a modified product and IMP then in phase 2.
I mean, I would say there is, this Berlin initiative also for cell and gene therapy or something, and that could sort of also serve as a platform to connect and have sort of on a higher level talks with PI and so on to sort of implement these kind of things. So hopefully, I mean, I think at least the problem and challenge for us, at least here in Germany, has been acknowledged, and there are sort of now, teams and experts and committees that are trying to take up the different pieces. So hopefully there will be a change. I think currently it's not really working yet.
Let me, Don Overstens from Miltenyi, let me comment shortly. We have a lot of interactions as Miltenyi with FDA, EMA, PMDA on sometimes weekly basis and have discussions. What we need to understand is that the regulator, not for the scientific part, I'm excluding PI, and there is very, very standardized approaches. The standardized approach for Europe runs through the EMA, full stop, because the local agency doesn't decide. It's the European agency, FDA, PMDA, and then Korean FDA in Australia, Canada, Switzerland, etc. Standard approach is, if you develop a drug, we want to see a randomized control trial so you can prove the drug is better than your standard of care. That's our thinking. And they don't deviate an inch from this thinking. Not an inch. I mean, my colleagues from BioNTech or other BioNTech or Autolus will definitely agree that this is their standard operating procedure. For discovery science, as you have described, that's another story. So I think the dialogue with regulators needs to be, if you want the drug to reach the big masses of patients in the United States, in Asia, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, then this set of requirements you hold of a randomized controlled trial. And I'll give you an example. We have this big discovery in autoimmune disease, that CD19, Georg chat with Miltenyi CD19 CAR T has amazing results in lupus. Guaranteed, the expectation will be 2 randomized controlled trials against a comparator in the United States. And I can tell you, 2 randomized controlled trials, whatever statistical method you use, you end up with 400 patients, at least. Huge studies. So my suggestion to the scientific academic community is, if you not only want the publications and the ASHs, but also the drug to reach an approval which is a prerequisite for the society to pay. Because you have an approved drug, and then the social system in Europe will pick it up, same in Japan, and in private insurances in the United States, or Medicare, Medicaid will pick it up eventually. The big prerequisite is a commercial approval of a drug so that all patients who are eligible could benefit. So I think that is the dialogue to have with the FDA, EMA, PMDA.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I might have a little bit of a provoking comment there. Should we talk to regulators outside of the G7 countries? Actually, I've done so. I've talked to regulators outside of G7 countries, and they're much more open to innovation.
Absolutely.
Of course, they always look at FDA and EMA, but they are open to basically moving quicker because they have patients that are in need. They don't get access to the therapies anyway that are currently approved in the G7 countries. So they're
I
a little
couldn't
bit more
agree
courageous.
more. I mean, I think it's very courageous to talk to Saudi Arabia. It's very courageous to talk to United Arab Emirates, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. They're very, very interested, not just to wait for an FDA approval and then ratify it, especially with their advanced medical system. They also take vast interest in what can we do and decide ourselves. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. One quick comment. I think that Professor Reardon was referring to GBM Agile trial as a platform. Is that correct? I think this is a randomized study. It's requiring very few patients.
Not the one I was referring to, but it's very similar to the one. Yeah, very similar.
So that was created in collaboration with FDA in order to facilitate approval of products for rare indications or relatively rare indications or most difficult indications as GBM is. So I think that joining such a study is allowing, as Jürgen was saying, for fewer patients towards registration. Thank you.
Absolutely correct. That platform is a great example. We have a similar one at our institution that I was referring to. But yes, it takes a product in the context of a multi-arm study, adaptively randomizing patients based on the outcome of the different arms and being able to go right from phase 2 to phase 3 in the context of a single trial.